And we are going live, and I think we're live. Welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond the general day to day, and that may be a little bit more difficult to talk about in our everyday lives. And I'm your host, Linda Corcoran, and I'm a research master's student at University College Cork in Ireland. And if you like what you see here, make sure to like and subscribe for notifications about when we go live. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest, Haley. We're going to be talking about making change for disabled grad students and academics. Haley is a PhD student in botany at the University of British Columbia in Canada. And not only is being disabled incredibly difficult in the academy in general, but when you add in that she's doing a subject that involves field work and lab work, that can be even more difficult. But we're here to talk about that. And not only is Haley here to talk about her own experiences, but she's also here to talk about the initiatives that she has founded and works on in her university that have been spurred by her experiences. So, hi, Haley. Welcome to Grad Chat. We're super happy to have you here. And why don't you introduce yourself a bit better?
Thank you, Linda. So I'm Haley, Haley Branch. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm first just going to give a bit of a description of myself. So I am a white woman with dark brown hair. It is currently in a braid to one side. I have gold glasses with white cat eye frames. And I'm wearing a kind of light seafoam kind of color t-shirt. And behind me, you can see a gray couch, a painting, and a cupboard, a white cupboard. I am going into my 5th year of my PhD. So I had my comprehensive exams / candidacy exams a couple of years ago. I'm at University of British Columbia, which is where I work and learn, and it is the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And I'm just so happy to be here today and talk about grad life, academia, and disability.
Fantastic. So I guess we should say I do know Haley outside of Grad Chat. She is someone that I have known for a while now. I think it's nearly a year. I think it's coming up in a couple of months, and we're both disabled grad students from completely different backgrounds, and we have completely different disabilities. But why don't we start off with, I guess, defining disability to make sure that everyone watching knows what we are talking about.
And that's a great idea. So I guess disability, it's incredibly diverse. And it can include, but it's not limited to physical disabilities, developmental, psychiatric, mental illness, sensory, cognitive, learning, hearing, visual, and invisible, as well as self-diagnosed or undiagnosed disabilities. I want to emphasize that mental health and illness is part of the disabled community, though sometimes there's a bit of disagreement about that. Mental health doesn't have to be a disability, but it absolutely can be. And to identify as disabled is really up to the individual. And I guess I imagine there are a number of people that are either already tuned in or will be watching this that maybe aren't disabled, and maybe want a little bit more background about disability in general. A lot of people think that the opposite of disabled is abled, so able-bodied. But what it really is enabled. So the opposite of disabled is enabled. We live in a society that enables certain kinds of body minds to navigate and have access to spaces. And this chooses which types of people to include and who not to. A metaphor I often like to use is imagine there's a building, and you want to get into this building, and this building has its door 10 feet off the ground. If you're at ground level, there's no way to get to that door. If stairs are built so that to get to the door, it's an active choice to allow access to that building for those who can use stairs. And so even people who think or are currently or are not disabled, they are still enabled in our society by the choices that are made around architecture, social norms, etc.
Absolutely. I think that is a great metaphor, because I guess when we talk about accessibility, not just in the academy, when we talk about being able to just get there, even just to undergrad, never mind to grad school and beyond, it's not set up at all for anyone with disabilities of any kind. And most universities have implemented maybe something at the undergrad level. Maybe they have accommodations for exams or classrooms. Not all of them even have that. But as soon as you get beyond that level, it gets very, very difficult to access anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, historically, academic spaces have been created to prevent disabled folk from entering. Generally, academic institutions were paired with institutions for the feeble-minded or for physically challenged individuals. They were these institutions side by side, one for progressing the human intellect, and one was to keep certain individuals out of society, both of which are actually very exclusive, right? But exclusive in very different ways. And these institutions for the disabled community were often places of research and of subjects for the academics. And so disability in academia really comes from this long line of violence and harm towards disabled people, particularly using them exclusively as research subjects or things to be cured, whereas there's not a lot of space for disabled researchers or research on just disability culture. There's still a lot of lack of that.
Oh yeah, it's definitely it's a big problem, and everyone hates when I do it, but I always say the academy is very much founded in eugenics principles, and everyone hates the word eugenics, and no one wants to pretend. Everyone wants to pretend it's the past, and it's a past we don't talk about, but it's not the past. It is very much still present in what is happening today, and it drives so much of the attitudes and so much of the behaviors, and also the research of everyone. And it can depend on the discipline you're in. Sometimes it can be more prevalent than others. We won't get into talking about that paper that was in defense of eugenics that was published recently, because we'd probably talk about it for hours. But maybe let's talk a bit about your experience. Why did you choose to go to grad school? And I guess why or how did you find the transition between undergrad and grad school as a disabled person?
Okay, there's a lot here. So my journey to academia, I think, has been a little bit of a weird one, especially as someone with physical disabilities, because I originally wanted to be a professional ballet dancer. And so I had actually been training to be one, but I progressively had more and more joint problems starting at the age of 11. And so I didn't really change gears towards science until I was about 16, 17. It was a really horrible time in my life because I was having to switch from this entirely um, very different kind of um, career. And so when I went into undergrad, I wasn't really entirely sure what I was going to be doing. I went into science. I actually had to take night school and summer school and stuff because I went to a special high school for dancing. And so I had to kind of, because I didn't have enough of the credits, I had to get all of that beforehand. So it's been a little bit of a weird ride. But once I was in undergrad, I thought it would be impossible to study something that made me so mad, like climate change. But I eventually realized that I could put my energy towards that. And so I went into evolution and ecology to understand how the choices humans have made have affected the rest of the natural world. And then I went to do my master's, and now obviously my PhD. But it was really when I was in my third or fourth year of undergrad that I decided I had to study desert plants. I did not expect to be such an enthusiastic botanist, especially as a kid. For me, I thought animals were where I was going to end up, but plants are my bread and butter. I love plants. I had the opportunity to go on a field course in the Mojave Desert. And during undergrad, and it was also in the White Mountains in California. And it was just so incredible. I was in so much pain the whole time, and I could barely make it up some of the hikes that we were doing. And so, I went really slow. I used 2 walking canes. No one pressured me, and it was just me doing it. And it was such an amazing experience, and I absolutely loved it. Um, so then I transitioned to my master's, and I actually had a horrible time during my master's. It was really difficult, and I was afraid it was going to impact my career. But my love for plants and my passion for research is, and I really do absolutely love academia. That it just that was what made me committed to continue this journey and do my PhD. Um, yeah, I guess. Um, so what I study, I guess I'll just quickly say that a little bit. So I study the effect of drought on the evolution of different plant populations and how they adapt to the severity of drought. And especially, there are droughts are becoming progressively worse and more frequent. And I could study deserts my whole entire life. I love deserts so much. I'm fascinated by how things can respond to stress. Perhaps it's because I'm such a stressed out person that I want to understand how other organisms, other individuals, especially ones that can't just get up and walk away, are able to withstand some of these stresses. And so that's kind of how I got into academia, how I got into where I am, and really why I want to stay. Like, I really would like to continue on. I'm planning on doing a postdoc and then hopefully a professorship somewhere. The disability aspect of this obviously does make it complicated because of navigating some of those spaces. I've had to, in the fields, you can absolutely be disabled and work in the fields. You just have to have perhaps the right people working with you. and maybe a bit of an understanding of what you need. I think when I was starting out, I didn't really know what I needed. But now I know that what I really need is to have a home base when I'm in the field. I can't do long backpacking, hiking, camping, field work. I can do maybe a little bit, but it's really not something that I can do long term. And it's really common in my field of studies is to have these long expeditions. Um, but for me, and some people think that I've had some microaggressions around this, thinking that, oh, I'm such a city person, or like I glamp and all of this stuff, because I I do need a home base. I need a bed. I need a place where I can get cold ice packs, and I need a bath. I need a tub. Yep, that seems luxurious, but I need it. Or else I'm a, I my joints start to really fall apart, and it's hard to keep moving and doing things like that. And so I've had some serious setbacks in my PhD because I didn't have these types of accommodations. We didn't have the money, the finances. It all really comes back to universities not having the financial support for their disabled academics. Um, we didn't have the funds to find me a place to stay. And so I changed my entire thesis, which I really hope, that doesn't, like, I really wish we can create a space where that doesn't have to happen. I love what I'm studying now. I wouldn't change it, but it was pretty heartbreaking to have to move away from doing, what I had set out to do when I first came here. Like
that can
so.
be, that sounds like a really, I guess, tough decision to have to make because the supports aren't there. And I guess one thing I like to say, I don't know how many people have said it to, but I like to say to myself anyway, is that the academy has got away, and the entire research institution funding has got away with paying people so little, and that can also affect disabled people, but we won't get into that part of it yet. It has got away with basically, I guess, half-assing training people and making things accessible for people. It's finding the cheapest way to do it, the person who'll do it for the least amount of money, and who'll work the longest hours. That is how the academy was formed and still kind of works. And just because it's functioning that way doesn't mean that it should function that way. And it's very much keeping disabled people out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. the 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 economics of the university and the lack of the funding for disabled students across, like students and academics, like the faculty members, it's quite shocking.
It is, and it's very reactive. They don't figure out what needs to happen until a disabled person gets there, and that's lucky. And then they're lucky if they get there, because most of the time, if they find out that you have disabilities, they obviously say that they don't discriminate, but they use other words like, you don't fit the culture here.
Yeah.
You because their labs weren't built accessibly. They were built for abled people. They were built for, and that can be able-bodied. That could be things that built in a manner where people who can't stand for an entirety of an experiment at a fume hood can't work there. People who have sensory sensitivities can't function there because there's too many beeping machines in a small space. And there's so many different inaccessibilities in labs themselves and in the way that people do field work and the risks that people take, more so, that I guess an able person can take, because they don't have to think about other things. And it can really, really affect the way that disabled people can access it. And even when they do reactively give something, they act like you should basically give them an award for allowing you to access something.
Yeah.
And if what they've given you doesn't work for purpose, you're out of luck.
The other thing with any type of if you've ever looked at accommodations and you look at, how to apply for it across the board, it always says within reason. And who decides what is within reason? Not the disabled community, not the people who need it. It is people who are looking at, how can we minimize the amount that we're spending while still making some kind of an accommodation. And it's quite upsetting.
Oh, it is. It's definitely. I think in Ireland it's phrased as reasonable accommodations,
Yeah.
and it is decided by abled people what reasonable accommodations are, and it leads professors to go, oh well, if the accommodations, or if you can't function in the lab, the field work with this module structure, the way that it is laid out, you obviously shouldn't be here. You're just being lazy. All of these things that we have to hear. Sorry, you're supposed to be the guest and I'm ranting. Let's go back to your experience. I'm sorry. I have a lot of opinions about this, but let's talk about you.
I think the accommodation stuff, I'm happy to have more of a dialogue. I have only one perspective, so.
So I guess you have worked on a number of initiatives, or I guess because of your experience in the academy. So do you want to talk a bit about that and what you have done, are doing, would like to do in the future? Let's start with have done.
Sure. Okay, so what have I done? So I guess the first kind of thing that I started at my university was more mental health, mental well-being oriented, which, as I already mentioned, is still within the disability sphere. And so within my department, two kind of departments, it's botany and zoology, because they have so much overlapping questions. I created a wellness initiative that has had a lot of success, and I think a big part of that is it's student run, but we have included faculty on it, and not just research faculty, but teaching faculty and staff, and postdocs. The reason for that is because I find that a lot of these things are kind of done in isolation, but as a community of, if it's your whole department, you need to really foster the importance of doing something to improve well-being that isn't in an isolated manner. The other thing too is that I just noticed that in general, universities have very little resources for graduate students' mental well-being. All of the programming is pretty much geared towards the undergrad population. And so I didn't think that was really appropriate, since we know the proportion of graduate students that, are, do struggle with mental health issues. And as part of this, I have now been working with a couple of other graduate students, one in philosophy and one in sociology, and we're trying to create a cross-campus equitable well-being initiative, where we take into account intersectional identities in relation to mental well-being, because I think in some ways some mental health programming has been in a way kind of whitewashed and doesn't really go into trauma and violence that is experienced by marginalized groups. Um, and
Absolutely.
yes,
Absolutely. Sorry.
yeah,
100% agree. It's there's so much research on minority stress as an effector of mental health, and yet when it comes to academia, they're just like, yeah, the white narrative, the cis narrative, the straight abled narrative, and nothing else.
exactly. And so we're trying to really push for that. We've had some, it's been taking a bit of time, but I'm really optimistic about something getting implemented. Um, I think the pilot is going to be for 15 different departments across campus, which is awesome. And I hope that other universities might follow suit.
That's
I guess,
amazing. Like, let's just take a second to be like 15 departments across the campus.
yeah, it's really exciting.
Sorry, but like I'm like, what? I can't get my department to do anything. One department. That's so amazing.
Yeah, I hope it goes through. And, if not, then I've still been trying to develop a kind of like handbook type thing that can be um, given out to departments across my campus on ways to kind of approach these issues, create your own initiatives, because it is a lot of work and everyone's just kind of reinventing the same things. And it leads to us not really getting anywhere. So it's best if we can all just work together. I've also, I guess last year, I started the Disabled Graduate Student Association at my university and across both campuses. So at UBC, there's a Vancouver campus and then Okanagan campus. So they're kind of far, they're pretty far apart. They're technically, I think, like 6-hour drive away from each other. So they're, yeah.
That is such a long thing. I don't think is my entire country 6 hours long. Maybe the entirety of the country.
You go around in a circle and it. Yeah, I know. This is just within one province. Canada is big, and yeah, we're still very new. Generally, what I've found is that any type of initiative within the first like year and a half, there's very little that really gets done. You need that momentum and a little bit more, uh, I don't know, dialogue with the institution before you can really get further along. But we've got some really awesome things that are already kind of fermenting, I guess. I don't know why fantastic. I chose that term.
I mean, it's totally good. It's in progress. It's where you're working on it, and
yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that we're working on, and this is Corin. You might know Tweety Mutant, is part of this group, and he's pushing really for getting more funding. So as we already mentioned, funding is so precarious for graduate students that are disabled. I mean, it's precarious for everyone. It is especially precarious for disabled graduate students because we take longer.
It's also just like, and I think it was someone in the UK brought up this point on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, how many PIs put extra money in their grants for if a student is disabled, for if a student requires adaptive equipment, for if a student requires extra funding to travel to a conference. And obviously that depends on where you are in the world, because some country grants do include funding for conferences and that sort of thing, and some don't. But PIs don't do that because they don't expect disabled people to be there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to say whether funds from a grant would even support something like that. A lot of the time, it's expected that it will come from the institution itself, but we don't really have much in a way there either. especially for the types of things that disabled grad students might need. We're not, we don't necessarily need longer time for exams. Many of us don't even have exams. We don't necessarily need, note takers in a class, because again, maybe we don't even take classes. Like the types of, I know those are two just very simple examples of accommodations. There's others like assistive devices like Dragon I forget. Okay. And these types of things that are expensive that can be provided from universities, but these don't necessarily help with the grad studies stuff, right? Because I mean, for instance, for me, I could be in the lab. I might need to be in the lab for 10 hours a day sometimes, right? And often that's the case because I don't have another pair of hands, and I might be a little slower. Or so something that we've talked a lot about is, so one aspect of being a disabled graduate student is that you might take longer, and so funding runs out if you had funding to begin with, and then it either weeds out disabled students faster because they either can't afford to even be in school anymore, or they are in a privileged state where they have support, perhaps from parents or something. And then so we're already like filtering out who gets to stay. The other aspect of that is that if you're in a type of degree like mine where you can't extend it, because I work with plants, they live for like 20 weeks and then they're done. I can't really, they dictate my degree. they pretty much, I'm at their disposal really. And so for me, it's not extended time. It's, I need an assistant. I need someone there that can be working with me who is essentially like a lab tech. But, I have been successful in getting grants and things like that. But, they say that that's for research. And research, for some reason, does not include labor. And so we're really trying to make this push that there should be grants that are more available for different kinds of accommodations that a grad student might need. And I really do think that even just like agencies and other funding, like organizations and stuff, or societies, they should be thinking a bit more about who they're excluding from doing research when they say labor can't be used. This is tangential to disability because this is more of a socioeconomic point. But in my field, there are really expensive types of research you can do. Like if you're going to do, genome-wide association, like sequencing and things like that. Any kind of genomics work is expensive. Then there's the other part of my field that does, you might do more like phenotype type work where you are counting number of flowers, length of the plant, these certain things which don't require a lot of funds to do, but perhaps you need to sample thousands of plants. And so what you really need is help with the work. And so this issue of funding not all being allowed for labor and getting assistance really is detrimental to disabled scholars and to scholars with lower economic status. And so again, we're perpetuating this able-bodied, more wealthy kind of researchers, which is really upsetting.
Absolutely. It's very upsetting. It's just like, stop the gatekeeping, please. And yeah. It's when we talk about disability, like we all know there are EDI grants that are coming mm-hmm. up, which is great, but so many of them don't include disability. So many of them don't think it's a minority group. It's a not counted as diversity. Getting accessibility for disability is not counted as inclusion. It's just really frustrating, and it does impact people who are who have more than one minority identity, because the disability community is so diverse and so massive that usually they also have other marginalized identities as well. And yes, I know I'm a white person, but and especially obviously it's disability dependent, but Indigenous people, Black people, and it tend to be the most discriminated against in disability community. They tend to be the less believed. They tend to get misdiagnosed more. It's their attitude is seen that they're perceived, well, to be honest, most disabilities are perceived at some point as being lazy, but they tend to get it more. They get it more often. They get there quicker, and it's really frustrating. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess one of your roles is that you are working with did you say the Diversity and Inclusion Office?
Yes. So I'm actually working with the Equity and Inclusion Office at my university. And so in addition to my thesis work, I am also doing a research project on equitable assessment of scholars with disabilities. So I've been working with the Canada Research Chair Program, and so that's who has funded this research. Essentially, the Canada Research Chair Program is trying to increase the representation and the diversity of their chairholders, and a group that has, even with certain preferential hiring processes and targeted hiring, disabled scholars have still fallen through the cracks. And so I've been kind of part of this task force trying to figure out, okay, why is this happening? I mean, we know in general why this is happening, but what are some ways that we can fix this? And so, of course, there's a lot of discussion about how we need to address the systemic ableism in institutions. But there are also some, ideas of ways that you can assess a CV, since CVs and what productivity looks like can be quite different. And that, so some of the things that have come up is that collaboration perhaps is more common in disabled groups, because, it means each chunk of the work gets, each person has a little bit less of that work to do, rather than having, a lot of sole author papers. And this often, when you're looking at faculty members, can be seen as, a negative rather than the positive of building collaboration, potentially international collaborations, having more perspective and viewpoints, which increases our scholarship, makes our scholarship better. And so trying to change some of those metrics a bit of like, why is it actually important to have collaboration? And then emphasizing the importance of outside work that's being done in your community, either within academia or not, and how this type of either public scholarship, public community work is also valid and important. Especially there's been a lot of discussion, recently about how there's been especially in the media, like kind of a shift in how the academy is viewed, and not really necessarily listening to experts. And so having scholars actually in the community outreach, just like, and working is actually extremely valuable and important for academia in the long run. rather than, being these isolated academics. Um, that's actually become, we've seen has become more and more harmful. And so just, yeah, trying to shift these ideas of what productivity looks like, how to evaluate it. Someone brought up an interesting thing about uh, looking at metrics of contributions relative to opportunity, because some people have had a lot more opportunities. And so how do we actually distinguish between, oh, well, let's, like, a basic example is you've applied for 20 grants and you've received 2 versus you've applied for 5 and you've received 1. How do, like, there, and that's a big one because of especially if you have a disability of any type of fatigue, that you might not have enough time, energy to apply for 20 grants that your other colleagues who do have that type of energy can. And so it's, yeah, there's been a lot of dialogue about how can we create these equitable assessments? How does that look? What does that look like? How do we do it? And so that will be made public in September, that report. So stay tuned.
That's so cool. I can't wait to read it. Like, and honestly, any extra report, any extra publication that comes out about disability, I'm always like, oh, this is great, because in the academy, in science especially, they don't care unless you have your publications. If you can bring up and bring up a list of publications, it doesn't matter what they are to them, really. If they're there, it counts as a point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we are nearly out of time, but is there anything else that you want to touch on before we finish this live stream?
I guess we didn't talk about some of, like, just some of the discriminations that instances I experienced. I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about those, or if that's just something
Definitely.
people can reach out to me about.
Yeah, do you want to maybe talk about it in short, even though that's such an important topic?
Yeah,
let's touch on it a little bit.
Yeah. So I guess a big one is that, like, before being diagnosed for, like, myself, that there's a lot of struggle with professors really understanding what I needed or not necessarily giving me any support because I wasn't diagnosed. Um, a big push I think that needs to be done is with doctors, because doctors don't understand the power they have in disabled lives as much as maybe we don't necessarily want them to. They really dictate a lot about what we can have access to. I think a big thing, because accommodations require doctor's notes and stuff, is to realize that even if you're not entirely sure, a doctor should be allowed to just say, like, there's something wrong, we're not sure yet, but yes, they're disabled. And I think that would be, like, that doesn't cost them anything and it would help us so much. There's also, I guess sometimes, like, I've had some issues with, you know, accessibility and accommodations when I've taught courses, because there's this whole distinction between when you're a student versus staff, and accommodations do not, they, like, the services don't overlap at all. And so I'm someone, you can already see I move my hands a lot. I need to be doing something with my hands. And so I've been penalized by instructors before, while I've taught for saying that I choose to knit or crochet when I teach. And that's because it actually keeps me more concentrated on teaching, because my hands can just do something else. And I don't do it like I'm just, like, out in front. Like, I usually do it, like, kind of underneath the desk or something, so that it's not distracting for other students. But I have been penalized and said that I'm an inattentive TA, not by students, by instructors. And it's kind of weird because I'm there fully engaged, whereas, other options that would be deemed okay is if I was on my computer, like, doing R code, which would mean that I'm completely engaged in my computer. But for some reason that seemed as okay. Yeah, I guess I've also had some issues with some of my mobility, and because I don't walk around the classroom. I've also been called out in evaluations of, like, not being, again, attentive to the students, whereas, like, all my students have been totally happy with coming up to me and asking the questions.
It's so
Um,
ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. I hate the way that we evaluate teaching, that we evaluate like a lot of universities are putting in universal design learning, which is great.
mhm,
You
it
need to do
is.
that.
Yeah.
But you need to go past it because universal design learning only benefits the students.
Yeah, exactly. There's no talk about how to make teaching like teaching accessible. It's all about the students. And sometimes actually some of the accommodations can like, we know that because disability is so diverse that some accommodations actually are, are good for one, but harm the other. And so like you need to have this good proper dialogue between students and faculty that are disabled and figuring out what's best for everybody. And I'm sure that you can always figure out what to do, but there needs to actually be some kind of centralized place to sort these types of things out. And it's upsetting that it's, students, faculty, staff, like, no, we're all a community working together and we need to, to make sure that it works. Sorry, I said all of that really fast because I wanted to make sure some of that got in.
No,
um,
it's so important, and I can't believe that we got the whole chat without talking about discrimination because it
there's
is
a lot to
such
unpack there. Yeah.
there is, and there's so many different things, like even just the frustrated sighs of people when you go like, you haven't provided captions, I can't follow what's going on, why, like I've had people literally like, every time I'm like, you need to make this event accessible, and every time we're coming back to preparing another event, it's still not accessible, and I'm like, at some point this is on you. You need to start with something. You need to take what I'm saying and improve the way that you structure things, the way that you start things, because it's not just me. I'm just the one who's talking about it because I'm a loudmouth. But um yes, okay. I think we're definitely out of time,
We're
but
done.
thank
Yes.
you
Thank you so much.
so much, Haley, for being an amazing guest. And I know you have so much more to say. If we had hours, we would be able to talk for hours. But for people who would like to talk or find out more about Haley's experiences, her initiatives that she is working on, all of her projects, definitely reach out to her because she is an amazing person. If you liked what you see here, make sure to like and subscribe to the PhD Balance YouTube channel or to our podcast series, depending on where you are. So this has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. We go live every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. And thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.